This edition of the Ridley Report is brought to you by ShireSociety.com. Liberty-related rants, recorded September 27th, 2020. What would happen if we were to take the drug freedom movement as it exists today and sort of extrapolate it forward, assuming that it sort of develops the same way that the civil rights movement developed after it began to become successful around 1965. Actually, I guess it began around more like 1960. But anyway, began to be effective. Began to be successful around 1960. But anyway, we're now, what? We're 60 years past that point now. The drug freedom movement began to be effective around 2010. So maybe we would be thinking about the year 2070 here. Of course, that's post-singularity, so there's just really no way to see. There's really no way to see past 2050. So let's imagine society developing and changing faster than it used to, and this sort of where the drug freedom movement stands around the year 2045. Before maybe the singularity has sucked all the air out of the room, and maybe drug freedom stops being even a relevant issue. Well, if you look at where the civil rights movement went after, it had achieved major successful status around 1970, the next 50 years were sort of this degeneration into speech codes, corrupt politicians, and again, this is after they led the most successful and mostly humane rebellion in American history. I'm not even sure the American Revolution rivals it in impressiveness. Of course, the civil rights movement continued to be right about a lot of things, and it's nice that there was someone on the scene, and has been someone on the scene ever since then, to stand up for at least somebody when they're singled out by police or government in inappropriate ways. But ultimately what happened is the pendulum swung so far that you had these freedoms that were not allowed in the 60s. Some of them became allowed, like the freedom to vote and the freedom for black people to travel safely, but the freedom to make ethnic jokes went away. And that is not a trivial thing, and it's not just symbolic. People are supposed to be able to say whatever they want. The problem is supposed to appear when they do something that is wrong. So, imagine if that's how this plays out with the drug freedom movement. Imagine 20, 30 years from now, around 2045, where you're not allowed to criticize drug users. You're not allowed to make jokes about them. You can lose your job for doing that. And the drug freedom movement is sort of degenerated into a, I'm allowed to wear whatever I want at Starbucks movement, which is, I'm sorry to say, what Black Lives Matter has already degenerated to some extent in New Hampshire. Although they're certainly right in some of their grievances. One of their grievances on the Facebook page for New Hampshire Black Lives Matter was that a couple of BLM members were being discouraged from wearing BLM swag at work, at a Starbucks. Well, okay, I gotta admit, I'm glad that anyone cares about their free speech, but you also gotta care about the property rights of the place where you're doing the speaking. Ultimately, the owner of the property has gotta be in the saddle. But there would be positive things, too, if you were to imagine the progress that was made with civil rights, and if you imagine that happening in the drug sphere, call it body rights, the right to put things in your body as you see fit, you would at least have governments being afraid, to look like a drug warrior, the same way governments today are afraid to look racist. Of course, governments these days, they seem afraid of so little that maybe they're not afraid enough, even of that. But it's important, those of us who advocate for drug legalization, that we never get to a point where we're stopping people from speech in the name of witch hunting drug warriors, or the liberty struggle in general. I mean, right now, you know, we're at the point probably where the liberty movement in the world, in I don't know, in the United States, let's say, is roughly probably about where the civil rights movement was in 1940. You would expect that it would be a long time before we could get to a point where we even have to worry about, you know, the ball rolling out of control uphill, right? There's no danger of the ball rolling out of control uphill. We are nowhere near being in a situation where libertarians are sort of quashing people's free speech on a large scale. Although it's interesting that actually a libertarian did just try to quash someone's free speech using government. I talked about that in the last podcast. Here in New Hampshire, libertarians are getting enough power so that you do have to start thinking, at least, about limiting libertarians' power here and there. Not usually. It's a very unusual thing that one of them abuses their power. But go back and listen to the last podcast for details. It's not something we want to do. But like I said, very little danger of the ball rolling out of control uphill. We're able to accomplish such limited things at this point that free speech advocates are about the last people who would ever need to fear us. And of course, many of us are coming to the defense, or at least not necessarily to the defense, but you know, we're opposing that libertarian that is acting in an anti-free speech manner. But anyway, the point is, you know, massive swings in morality can occur over a relatively short period of time, and I suspect we'll see something like that happen over the next 10 years, maybe even the next 10 months, where things that were almost mandatory become almost forbidden, or maybe things that were mandatory become forbidden. No almost about it. Now, completely switching topics. Jim Dador has beat me to the punch on this. He's a futurist. And I've been meaning to make a podcast sort of defending millennials, right? And before I could get around to reading this into my recorder, I heard this awesome podcast or, you know, discussion by Jim Dador, a Hawaiian futurist who is really very humble, but also kind of confident. Really old guy, depression baby. I don't even know if he's still alive. This might have been 4 years ago that this speech was made. But he was saying sort of politically incorrect things about my generation, Generation X. He was just saying that we're worthless and useless and lazy. Okay. At least I know you're not going to try and tell me what I want to hear, right? But he believes that the millennials are sort of like the World War II generation. Can-do attitude, get something done, organized, successful. Personally, I think the World War II generation is a little overrated, but I'm glad to hear someone saying something that, you know, constitutes a little bit of counter-programming, right, about the millennials. I mean, I'm so tired of people criticizing the latest generation just because it's there. I mean, every single new generation that has come along, ever since the day I was born and before, people have just whined about them, like, you're so useless, they can't do, I wish they would. Okay, fine. I don't know. It's just like a knee-jerk thing. I think this goes back to the Romans. I think the Romans have been complaining about the new generation. The ancient Romans probably were complaining about the newest generation. You know, and it's not like I see anything that gives me huge amounts of hope, but it's just that I've never seen anything in millennials that made me think they were different in a bad way. All of the millennials I know seem fairly impressive, but in a more kind of concrete sense, you know, certainly these are people who really, they grew up on, they know computers in a way that it's sort of like with language, right? They acquired computers and computer skills instead of having to learn them like I did. So they say that a person who, you know, grows up around Mandarin acquires Mandarin instead of learning it. Someone like me has to learn it. It's the same way sort of with millennials and computers. You know, having been born in the 60s, I didn't even own a computer until I was about 26. You know, they tried to teach me some programming when I was 17, It was just Greek. It didn't make any sense. I had no aptitude at all. I was useless in that computer programming class. I never understood a thing about it even after I graduated. I think I somehow got a B just because I'm from leaning on my lab partner who did understand it. And partly that's just me. I'm just not a coding person. You know, they say that coding is going to become like literacy to some extent, and you want to have coding skills even if you don't do that for a living. Because having reading skills, obviously, is really useful even if you don't read for a living. Well, I've kind of looked into it just a little bit, and I don't think I can do that. But the millennials sure can. You know, they are a little bit cyborgs, and I think that's good. I think it makes them superior to me in many ways. Now, Dater also has disturbing things to say about him, and the most disturbing part is that he doesn't know it's disturbing. but he says that one of the things that makes millennials great is that they sort of grew up in nurseries. You know, they were away from their parents so much in these sort of organized schooling environments, I guess more than previous generations, that they're kind of into rules and organization and so forth. And that could be really bad. People are already way too into rules and way too into being organized. I mean, here, me, in the most individualistic country in the world, supposedly, and the most individualistic state in that country, to me, everyone seems like a collectivist. Imagine what it would be like anywhere else. Oh, my God. Anyway, I still am glad to see that someone is sticking up for this generation. Even the boomers accomplished some useful things. Let's hope they did, or let's hope that some of what they wanted was good, because Dater says that their ideas are going to become holy writ by the time this is all over, by the time the millennials have really made their mark. He believes that the millennials are a type of generation which just goes forward, and like you have like one generation that has an ideal but they can't do it. The next generation kind of reacts to that and then harks back to the times long before, and then the third generation actually goes and they're doers and they create the world that the idealists were dreaming of. And then it just becomes, well, of course the world's like this, right? Well, I'm not sure how comfortable I'm going to be in a world where the boomers' ideas are taken for granted, because a lot of those ideas are pretty socialistic. On the other hand, they were against certain types of wars, and they were they were against racial discrimination, so that's good. Okay. Going back to some New Hampshire news, I had mentioned that a New Hampshire liberty activist had tried to quell free speech, and I did actually have an update about that. You still may want to go back and listen to the previous file, but I have the activist in question has issued a statement. So this is State Representative Max Abramson. I don't know if he's a sitting rep or a former rep, but I guess he must be a sitting rep or he wouldn't have been able to do this. State rep in the New Hampshire legislature. So here's what he wrote on his blog. Quote, Rep. Abramson files resolution. Take child soft porn off air. The IMBD description of the action... this is complicated. I'll have to give you some background now. So he's complaining about a Netflix movie called Cuties, which I don't know anything about. But he says that the movie is soft porn, featuring underage females. And he also says, quote, my job is to take my constituents' concerns and act on them, and several of my constituents, many of them moms, have raised the issue with me. They believe Netflix is marketing directly to pedophiles, unquote. All right, so that was his reason for sponsoring this resolution, apparently. There is some more pushback against mask mandates. I guess what I've seen on nhcalendar.org is that a group called Absolute Defiance, I bet they're not actually going to follow through on that name, but a group called Absolute Defiance is running at what looks to be weekly protests against the face diaper mandates, as they call them. These generally appear to be at Manchester City Hall. So I think they're happening each Thursday, but they also appear to be happening on other days as well, maybe whenever there's a government meeting or something like that. But it's starting to become a regular thing. So just go to nhcalendar.org to find out the latest. Another regular civil disobedience event that's going on, another regular event aimed against masks that's going on. This one is civil disobedience. The absolute defiance event may not be. But, correcting myself again. The absolute defiance event probably involves some civil disobedience. But the other one is the nightcap at Central Square in Keene is happening looks like it's every Saturday night at midnight. So Saturday night going into Sunday morning. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's Friday. I can't tell. But anyway, same thing. nhcalendar.org will give you the details as to when this is going on. And this one has been getting some pushback. The police have begun ticketing the cars of the people who attend. I still have not heard of any punishments of anyone like organizing big protests, right? Like the ones in downtown Concord at the State House, where you have hundreds of people doing civil disobedience at once by simply gathering in violation of the governor's order. I think all of those people, none of them have been punished for that. And I also still have not heard any reports of infection spikes as a result of these events. So that's good. OMG, I'm at the 16-minute mark only. And I have run out of things to tell you or to pontificate about. However, I did write a song back in 1997. I should probably just read it to you as a poem, because we never really completed the performance. If you don't like hearing poems, I'm giving you this warning. Flee now, or forever hold. But I don't think you'll find it all that annoying. Maybe you'll even find it clever. I am an animal lookist. An animal lookist is what I am. When I look at animals, I see eggs and spam. People who eat bunny food consider me quite savage. But if it had been up to them, I would be eating cabbage. Looky, 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 pretty animals are nice. Looky, 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 I eat ugly ones with rice. Looky, 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 flying hummingbirds are pleasant. Looky, 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 now it's time to eat some pheasant. Mahatma Gandhi, I am not. Nor C.S. Lewis neither. I am a hungry, smart, bipedal, atmospheric breather. I can't remember the next stanza. Rodents, wasps, boars, and serpents, they fill my heart with dread. It does not deeply trouble me if smart pigs keep me fed. But look, a pretty butterfly alighting on my head. Surely none but evil one would ever want it dead. And when revealed a baby seal was seen on television, being clubbed to death prefer to show an exhibition, I will write my congressman and express my derision. Now let's go eat some hot dogs at the rodeo competition. Looky, 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 pretty animals are nice. Looky, 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 I eat ugly ones with rice. Looky, 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 flying hummingbirds are pleasant. Looky, 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 I would like to eat some pheasant. Actually, that song was inspired by a mainstream press reporter who I used to work with. I've always been meaning to write him and let him know that he created a song, basically. But he was watching a video where, someone captured video of someone clubbing seals. And he said, well, if that's so scandalous, where does that leave? That's nothing compared to what happens to a cow over a 2-year period while it's being held in a tiny box and, milked for milk. All right. Sorry for going off topic. Ridley out. ridleyreport.com.
The old world is collapsing, and it's going to take its slave driver governments with it. But what will rise up in their place? In New Hampshire, the Shire Society has a plan, a thriving web forum, and a history of action.
It didn't take long to come up with a plan.
You can sign up right now at shiresociety.com.